Long before I got diagnosed as autistic, I actually believed that I was highly sensitive and introverted. I mainly identified as that and knew that I had to recharge in solitude. What I like most about Elaine Aron's highly sensitive terminology, or also what Susan Cain has described about introversion, it is not deficit-oriented as is autism. It's not seen as a disability. And then somehow you are treated in a completely different way by so-called autism experts who think they have to re-educate you because everything is about behavior. So you are a cat and they always try to train you as a dog. And this is all wrong. And I really would prefer if we could look at autism in the same way as we look at high sensitivity and introversion. I still call myself ASP, even though suddenly this term Asperger's has become almost like a slur, or you are criticized if you still use it, but this is how I was diagnosed, so I don't care. And I find the term ASP really helpful because then it is clear where on the spectrum you are. Or maybe we can find a different term everybody agrees on that would represent this same so-called high-functioning autism. Yet the two are still compared. This may be surprising, but from where I stand, it's not surprising. The author of this article writes that both have been treated very similarly by the general public. I would disagree because, as I said, autism is seen as a disability or mental health issue, just as autism is now increasingly seen as a healthy trait. Being an HSP is not a disorder, and it's a trait found in up to 20% of the population. Both traits also come with a ton of advantages. In the case of high sensitivity, that includes empathy, compassion, creativity, and the intuitive ability to see connections that others miss. Well, I can very much say this applies to myself. I do have empathy, I do have compassion, I am creative. And yes, I see connections that others miss, and it drives me nuts because they just don't see it. Whatever you say. High sensitivity is unrelated to mental health disorders. High sensitivity is also sometimes compared wrongly to various mental health disorders. The big ones are schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress disorder. These two conditions have little in common on the surface with each other or with being an HSP, but all of them can involve increased sensitivity to sensory stimuli. Yes, they can. But I have been saying this for a very long time, that when you are so sensitive as an HSP or autistic, then your window of tolerance is way narrower That means you can become stressed more quickly if you're forced to remain in that situation. Then you may develop PTSD because this is traumatic and you cannot get away. It's like a caged animal. And the author himself writes, PTSD is a bit trickier because highly sensitive people may be at higher risk of developing PTSD if they go through some kind of trauma. But PTSD patients show none of the enhanced activity in areas related to calmness, self-control, or social awareness that highly sensitive people show, and suffer a variety of symptoms that HSPs without trauma do not. Yes, absolutely. It's what goes on in the brain if you have PTSD. You get tunnel vision and then you don't have time for empathy. You are in a fight, flight, or freeze response. You are in a survival response, and then empathy has no place in there. It's about survival. But again, if you are HSP with PTSD or autistic with PTSD, then you might be less empathic when you feel stressed. But if you are in a calm state, then again, you are in the ventral vagus state, in the window of tolerance, and then you are open and compassionate and empathic, just the same. Disruptions in a PTSD sufferer's brain, for example, tend to affect their memory and their ability to integrate new information. These abilities and the capacity to process information in general are actually strong points for a highly sensitive person. Perhaps most strikingly, high sensitivity is a trait that is with a person from birth and is healthy in most people, unless you get traumatized. PTSD is something that develops only in response to traumatic circumstances.
This is a passionate one. How can the HSP reconcile himself, we notice, to the oppression of living in an extroverted-oriented culture? Where is the good life available for an HSP? Am I in the wrong country or on the wrong planet? Oh, I feel for this person, of course. It's almost a wail of despair. It's not really meant to have an answer, but to know that many, many people in this room wonder about these same things. You definitely can feel like you're in the wrong country or on the wrong planet, and that is really hard. It's really hard. And I think this person is identifying himself probably as a man, and I think it's so much harder for men to be among non-sensitive men, and it's just really difficult. And I just can only express sympathy.
For highly sensitive people, social situations are extra rewarding. Human beings in general are wired to find social interactions rewarding. This encourages us to form strong bonds, help each other out, and cooperate with one another. It's always been a key to our survival. Highly sensitive people are no exception, and may respond even more strongly to social interactions than others do, feeling anywhere from calmed to downright jubilant about a positive interaction. People with autism, however, experience social interactions differently. For them, Acevedo's study points out, there simply isn't as much of a sense of reward, calmness, or emotion involved in socializing. An exchange with another person may get their attention, but not necessarily feel meaningful. The study says this further affects their ability to respond appropriately to others. I don't know about that, because I really find it rewarding. But it absolutely depends on the person. I'm still not exactly sure about it, but possibly more right hemisphere dominant people, they seem to have a more calming effect on my nervous system. And therefore it really depends on the person. And it depends on the voice also. If a person has a really regulated nervous system, they are in a ventral vagal state, very calm, very open, very friendly, compassionate. Then, of course, my nervous system will not register any threat. And those are the mirror neurons firing. And it is a deep exchange from one nervous system to the other. And sometimes not even words are necessary. You can just feel each other out, and either you feel in danger or not. Again, it depends on the person. But in general, I can say, in a group, I will run for the hills. I don't like groups, it's too much. I have to do one-on-one. I cannot connect in a group of people. This is overwhelming, and then I rather stay away. However, if I find somebody that I like in a one-on-one interaction, then there is connection. And it can be deeply rewarding, deeply fulfilling when you find a topic to talk about, and then there is the warmth of the person talking to you. So this is deeply recharging and regulating. But also I will then need to recharge in solitude again. I could not be in the company of somebody 24/7. This is too much, and then I would feel exhausted. Interpretation matters a lot here. To be clear, autistic individuals can and do form deep, meaningful relationships like anyone else. The difference is in how rewarding they find social interaction in its own right. Whereas it's extra rewarding for HSPs, it is less inherently rewarding for autistic people. Their brains handle stimuli in dramatically different ways. Given that both HSP and autistic individuals can be extremely sensitive to stimuli, it's no surprise that they do share some areas of high brain activity, specifically areas related to attention and reacting physically or mentally to stimuli. But that's about where the similarities in brain activity end. The highly sensitive brain, for example, shows higher than typical levels of activity and areas related to calmness, hormonal balance, self-control, and even self-reflective thinking. The ability to process one's own actions and feelings and come to deeper conclusions about them. I do that a lot. These go hand in hand with the greater level of empathy and depth of processing that define high sensitivity. All of these are either positive, useful traits or can be good or bad depending on the situation. And all of them contrast starkly with the autistic brain, which Acevedo found to be less active when it comes to the brain regions related to calmness, emotion, and sociability. Okay. And now, this is what I want to point out, this terminology of HSP and introversion in comparison to autism being a disorder. What's interesting is what else this study suggests. At every step, it practically trips over the fact that high sensitivity is strongly beneficial. Being an HSP comes with heightened activity in useful brain regions, strong association with desirable personality traits, and even a tendency toward positive, useful, pro-social behavior. We suggest that adaptive SPS strategies involving empathy, awareness, calmness, and physiological and cognitive self-control may serve a species by facilitating deep integration and memory for environmental and social information, which may ultimately foster survival, well-being, and cooperation. In other words, your high sensitivity might be an evolutionary advantage, one that helps our entire species.